My name is Dylan, and I have been telling street stories for over 15 years. I usually talk to the kids or young adults who are at risk of drug abuse and peer pressure. I start off with a series of fast-paced escapades, which lead some kids into changing their traditional playground of gangs into something positive. My stories follow their adventures from selling or using drugs and alcohol. This helped them to become entrepreneurs, choreographers, and songwriters. Also sports managers, and military special forces, even investigative detectives. Raw Productions, Reach Out and Witness Productions presents Hoodzville Rap. Written and produced by Larry W. Keys. This movie is about peer pressure and its consequences. Some people never have to go through it. But there are some who go through it and wish they didn't have to. It takes all types of people to become a role model, depending on the situation, time, and age. The setting, plot, and characters of this movie have been chosen by circumstances of living in a drug-infested city. I'm not here to glorify the situation but only to identify the situation. Because it's one thing to live it and another to survive it. Praise the Lord, the weather is about to get rough, and the storm is setting in for real. Do you guys think that these stories are soft or something? Then, just hang in there, and you'll see what's up. It's one thing to live it. Another, to survive it. Now, let's finish off where we left off at. Then Lander said, "They be lookin' for us." "For what?" Country asked. Jim slapped Lander's hand and smiled, "What you think, fool?" Then they both laughed, "Ha ha ha." Country said, "What the hell is up with you two?" They kept the stick up from him and laughed again. Then they told him what they did as they explained to him by acting out each role they played. Then they gave Country the money and explained to him about where to cop some dope from up the pool room. Then Lander balled up his fist and said, "You better hurry up back." Country and Jim laughed at Lander while he was looking like a big-time gangster. But then it was Jim's turn to play gangster, and then he lifted up his sweatshirt and showed his rod to Country so he would know for sure that they meant business. They all burst out laughing this time because they were still youngsters en route to becoming gangsters. So they thought, Jim said, "And hurry up man, I'm ill." Country grinned and said, "No problem, I got the easy part, see you in a few." As they walked Country down the steps out the front door. "Close my door boy, cause you letting out my heat," his mother shouted from in the kitchen as she approached the living room where they were. Then Jim and Lander shut the door, as they headed for the stairs to Lander's room. Lander's mother just happens to peep out the window, because she saw flashing lights through her curtains, and then she said, "I wonder what Country did, I don't understand it, and he is such a nice kid." Then she turned to Lander and Jim as they stopped halfway up the stairs and said, "I don't know what he did but, you'd bet not be involved, Lander." Lander said, "We don't know nothing, Mom." Lander was looking all pitiful about the situation. Then they both went upstairs to Lander's window and watched the police handcuff Country. Jim said to Lander, "I wonder why they snatched him up." Jim and Country both were light-skinned, slim, with short afros. Jim looked at Lander and said, "Maybe he looks like me." Lander said, "Goddamn, you right come to think of it." Then Jim said, "I don't think he's going to do the time for me." Jim sat down beside Lander, not only ill from not shooting some dope, but also scared to death. The cold steel was against his thigh only to remind him of what he had done earlier. This stuff was serious enough for him to rock back and forth and almost pray to God. Ill from not having dope in his system, body, and scared that Country was going to snitch on him about the money. Jim was reluctant to look out the window again. But his curiosity got the best of him. All of a sudden Jim looked out the window again and Country was being put into the police car. Country looked up at Lander and Jim in the window with a terrifying look of fear. Seemed like Country and Jim felt the same fear. Jim left Lander's house, went around the back way up the street to his home. When Jim entered the house he smelled reefer, marijuana, and asked his mom what that smell was. As usual she denied any smell, as she tried to fan away the smoke away, talking bout a fly was in the house. Jim did a half smile, then went to his room and sat down on the side of his bed and thought of how his life started out. He didn't start out a bad kid, or did he? He thought about his brother Mickey and years gone by. Mickey was locked up again as usual for fighting. Then Jim's eyes began to get heavy from all the excitement. He closed one eye to think about what had just happened that day. He drifted into a nod as his thoughts began to come together. Still thinking, one eye was half open, the other closed. He thought about how he hung out with the guys who stole cars, ate pills, shot dope, and all the excitement of selling dope. Then he thought to himself, maybe I'm addicted to selling dope, but from all this he was beginning to become a problem. The problem child, he said that he wouldn't be because of his brother. Now the only thing he dwelled on was keeping his parents off his back so he could continue the stuff that he was doing. With his mom and dad caught up in the drug world now, smoking weed, it became harder for him to fool them about what he was doing. So, school was his only way to keep them off his case. Then his mind flashed back to his situation. He thought to himself while looking out the window. Where did I go wrong? Now somebody who looks like me is going to jail. Or was he? Jim thought out loud, country bet not snitch on me. As he wiped a tear from his eye, he grabbed his stomach, then wiped his nose, and rolled across the bed in pain. Then another thought came to him. If only I had some dope I could work this mess out. Jim rolled off the bed and headed for the door. As he slammed the door shut with a nasty attitude he thought out loud with strong feelings. Jim said, I'm gonna get me some damn dope today. As Jim walked down the steps of the apartment he lived in, the door swung open with Mark and his girl swinging on his arm. She lived downstairs from Jim. Mark said, Hey Jim, your boy Hector's brother is throwing down at the med center, man. He be getting paid with that weed. Jim answered him with a puzzling look on his face. Weed don't sell that great around here, and you know it? Jim starting to feel weak from not eating and no dope, Mark said as they walked by him. It sells like crazy when you lace it with cocaine. Man, he be selling $2 joints and getting paid. Jim said, Oh, he is he? In a sly voice, then he knew how he was going to get his blast. He checked his dip, positioned his Roscoe for easy access to pull out, cocked his hat further to the side, and headed for the med center. The med center was up the street around the backside of the schoolyard. When Jim got there he stood by a tree and watched the junkies line up for those joints. Jim pulled out his rod and said to himself, he lucky I don't do no cocaine. As he approached Ronnie he noticed a woman next in line. As he got closer the woman looked familiar to him. Then he saw that it was his mother. He quickly made a beeline, detour, through the crowd and walked around the school to the playground on the other side, mad as hell. Now his mom is on that stuff. Tears came to his eyes and he cried out loud. Lord, what you doing to me? I can't take this no more. As Jim continued to the playground his face was filled with tears. Then soon as he stepped on the playground he fell to his knees, took out his rod and started digging a hole with it. Not knowing who was there he continued to talk to himself, about himself, asking for the Lord to have mercy on him because he didn't mean to turn out this way. The deeper he dug in the ground the harder he cried. Finally he stopped, threw the gun in the hole, stood up and started kicking the dirt back in the hole. Then the girl, Jackie from his school who was about his age was there. She didn't take no stuff from nobody. She was there with her little brother and sister to play safely in the playground. So, she was the one picking up wine bottles, jar tops with leftover drugs in them, also glue bags and needles. She walked over to Jim with this brown paper bag filled with drug stuff and looked over at Jim as he stood there with a long face. Jackie said, You finish yet? 'Cause I like to clean up and you in my way. Jim looked at her as she bent down by his feet and picked up another needle and put it in the bag. Jim said, You mean to tell me that you clean this whole playground up by yourself? Jackie looked over at her brother and sister and then looked at Jim and said, "When they get old enough they'll help out too, so other kids after them can have a safe place to play." Jim wiped his face and said, "Then I guess I better take my rod from out of that hole, huh?" Jackie said, "If you're throwing it away then let's bury it deeper than that." Jim smiled a little and said, "Yeah, you right, I need to go a little deeper or one of those future kids you talkin' about will dig it up." Then Jim looked over at her little brother and sister. When he looked back at her she was walking toward the guy named Mac, who had just entered the playground. Jackie said, "Oh no, the playground is closed, big boy. No more junkies this morning." Mac said, "Who in the hell you talkin' to, girl? I'll kick your ass." Jackie stepped back and stooped down by the fence, never taking her eyes off of Mac, and stood back up with a long 2x4 stick and said, "You gonna do what?" Just then Jim walked over to Mac and said, "You heard her, go somewhere else." As he balled up his fist, he stood between Mac and Jackie facing Mac. Mac looked at Jim and said, "Look, little Mickey, I ain't got no beef with you. She can't be keeping us out of here during the daytime. Who do she think she is? I need to sit down and get my blast." Jim raised his fist and said, "There ain't no more us, junkie, I quit." Then he punched Mac square in his right eye. Mac put up his dukes, guards, hands, and Jackie swung the 2x4 stick and it cracked across Mac's shoulder. Then he screamed out loud, "Oh, shucks." Then he took off running. Jackie's brother and sister were so busy playing that they didn't notice the trouble. Jim looked at Jackie and Jackie looked at Jim. She put her stick back down next to the fence and Jim walked over. "Start digging a deeper hole for his used to be Roscoe." Jackie walked over to Jim and said, "Are you serious about no more drugs?" Jim looked up at her with his eyes open wide and a big smile, then said, "I don't need it anymore." Jackie reached out her hand and Jim reached out his hand and they shook hands. Then Jackie got on her knees to help him bury the Roscoe. They both looked up and saw two more little kids come to the playground. Jackie's little brother and sister ran over to greet them, playing a game of tag. Jackie looked at Jim and said, "I told you." Jim just smiled and said, "I see, you was right." They stood up and start collecting the junkies' mess, and then Jackie said, "If you want I'll help you kick your habit, only if you want me to." As she battered her eyes up and down and kicked some more dirt over the hole. Jim said, "Okay, because I think I'm gonna need some help to go cold turkey. Straight's over." Jackie smiled and then Jim smiled back. Jackie said, "I think I'm gonna need some help too, cleaning up is a big job for a little girl like me." The whole time looking into Jim's eyes and smiling, then Jim looked at Jackie and said, "Pass me that junk bag, girl." Jackie passed Jim the junk bag and headed toward the other side of the playground with such a serious look. As she walked away she mumbled something with a smirk look on her face. "Here we go again," she said to herself. Jim looked past her and at the other side of the playground was Kathy, they call her Cat for short. Because the girl could fight so well and she would scratch you up like a cat. She was a mean junkie. As Jackie walked past the kids, her brother and sister and their friends, she waved for them to go down there where Jim was standing. Mikey said, "For what? It ain't like he gonna tell us a story or something, Jackie." As he was being chased by another kid he headed toward the other end of the playground after he saw Jackie's look that she had on her face. Then they all migrated down to that end of the playground where Jim was standing. He looks on as Jackie and Kat were battling with words, then the body language let Jim know that they were about to get it on. Cece, Mikey, Joey, and other little kids stood there with Jim. Then Cece said, "Now we can watch them fight or you gonna tell us a story?" They all began to laugh at Jim, but Jim was more concerned about Jackie. He never used to care about people before he hooked up with Jackie, even as just a friend. Then Jim saw Kat reach out with her hands and Jackie put up her hands to protect her face. Jim took one step toward the other side of the playground and Mikey and Joey stepped in front of him and Mikey said, So was it gonna be, junkie? A story or a fight? Jim looked down at them kids and instead of 4 of them he counted 7. Jim said, "Hold up shawty, I'm here to help, I'm on your side. You couldn't handle my stories, because you have to think too hard to figure them out." Joey said, "Oh yeah, try us." Mikey said, "Yeah, come on with it, shawty." Then they all laughed at Jim for a second or two. As Jim begins his story he watches as Jackie hit Cat in the face, then he thought to himself, "Damn, Jackie fights just like a boy." Then all of a sudden Cat charged Jackie and Jackie put up her hands again to protect her face, then stepped to one side and kicked Cat straight in the stomach. Cat bent over screaming and out of breath, gagging. Then Jackie hit her once then twice, and that's all he needed to see, and he began his story with, "God bless the fools and babes, the simple-minded jack of all trades. Once upon a time there was this bum and he was his mother's only son. He wore one shoe on, one shoe off his feet, looking in trash cans for something to eat." Then Jim looked over to where Jackie and Cat were, only to see Cat running out of the playground fast as possible. As Jim smiled he continued his story as he watched CC put her hand over.
Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight. Lift up your head, hold it up high, high. We need your love in order to survive. Cause on my block kids are selling dope, 11, 12, and 13. Some say their manhood will never be seen. Try to talk to them, you look like you're crazy. Some to get through to, and some are just lazy. They leave their young girlfriend for habits of babies. To be behind bars is just plain crazy. Doing drugs in the street and not enough to eat. They lie and steal, it's no big deal. Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight.